Hello everyone! Since we won't be meeting in person this week due to the scheduling of the Applied Behavior Analysis International Conference, I'm recording the lecture that we would have had in class. Like all Edpuzzles, some opportunities for active responding will be interspersed throughout the lecture. All of the questions will be multiple choice so that you can receive immediate and clear feedback since I won't be there to help clarify things in person. During this module, we're reviewing extinction, a form of reactive intervention. Reactive interventions are those that involve manipulation of variables after the target behavior occurs, as opposed to proactive interventions, by which we manipulate variables before the behavior occurs. First, what is the general definition of extinction? Extinction is the discontinuation of the contingency of reinforcement that previously maintained the target behavior, resulting in a decrease in that behavior over time. It's often said that extinction is both a procedure and a process. That is, we use the term in two different ways. First, we implement the procedure of extinction by making sure that we no longer reinforce the behavior. Second, we say that behavior undergoes extinction or is extinguished if the process of extinction actually occurs. This is because the procedure of extinction can look different depending on the function of the behavior. If we implement the procedure of what is called attention extinction or planned ignoring, but the behavior is actually maintained by escape from demands, the process of extinction will not occur. This chart shows the three basic functional variations of extinction procedures and whether or not they'll be effective depending on the function of the target behavior. So, if we implement attention extinction, no longer providing attention when the target behavior occurs, and the behavior is maintained by attention, that will be an effective treatment, shown in the top left cell of this table. If we implement attention extinction and the behavior is maintained by escape from demands, the intervention will actually be contraindicated. This means that it will actually reinforce the behavior. If we ignore the behavior that is maintained by escape from demands, the individual will just get to continue escaping from the demands. This relationship is shown in the middle left cell of the table. Now let's go to the next column. If we implement escape extinction, making sure to keep the demand in place when the target behavior occurs, this will be an effective treatment if the behavior is maintained by escape from demands. In what case would escape extinction be contraindicated? Escape extinction is contraindicated if the behavior is maintained by attention. If we keep emphasizing the demand, talking to the individual about the demand, prompting compliance, etc., we're actually providing attention, which would reinforce the behavior. Escape and attention extinction would simply be irrelevant for behavior maintained by automatic reinforcement. In that case, we'd need to use sensory extinction, in some way preventing the effects of the behavior that are maintaining that behavior. So, you can see that it's absolutely necessary to conduct a functional behavior assessment before implementing extinction. Otherwise, you won't know what extinction procedure to use. To review, these are the very basic functional variations of extinction. First, attention extinction, no longer providing access to attention contingent on a response. This is often called planned ignoring. Bear in mind that if you dramatically divert your attention in a huff when the behavior occurs, that can actually be enough attention to maintain the behavior. The idea here is simply to not react at all. Tangible extinction involves no longer providing access to an item or materials if the target behavior occurs. Pretty straightforward. During escape extinction, you no longer provide escape if the behavior occurs. The way this looks depends on the demand or aversive stimulus in question. If it's an academic demand, you could continue to keep the expectation in place, perhaps prompting compliance or not allowing the individual to leave the area. In the case of automatic or sensory extinction, you would no longer allow the response to produce the functional reinforcer, possibly through long sleeves or padding if the behavior is self-injurious and maintained by the feeling of one's skin. How could you implement sensory extinction if the behavior of biting one's nails was maintained by the feeling of the nail between the teeth? As always, keep in mind that all of the interventions we're reviewing are likely going to be used in the context of a treatment package. That is, they'll be combined with each other. With that being said, in isolation, one problem with proactive interventions is that when you fade out the intervention, the behavior will likely start to occur again. The behavior is still functional, that is, it will likely still contact reinforcement if it occurs. In the case of extinction, the behavior will cease to occur long-term because it no longer produces reinforcement. Similarly, if you teach and reinforce a competing alternative behavior in the case of DRA or a similar intervention, if the problem behavior is still also being reinforced, it will take longer for the replacement behavior to be acquired. This is especially the case if the problem behavior is being reinforced more often or at a higher magnitude. In addition, in some cases, there isn't an appropriate functional alternative behavior to establish. For example, in the case of SIB maintained by the sensation of self-harm. In that case, a form of sensory extinction would be the most straightforward way to functionally eliminate the target behavior, though you'd also likely combine that with differential reinforcement of an incompatible behavior. Since behavior is maintained by its consequences, altering the consequence contingency is the most direct way to affect behavior. Proactive interventions only temporarily alter the likelihood of behavior, and differential reinforcement interventions make other behaviors more likely, but don't directly target or eliminate the problem behavior. Again, these interventions are always going to be used in combination with each other, and a huge body of research indicates the addition of extinction to a treatment package makes that treatment package more effective. Another benefit is that, unlike punishment, extinction does not require the addition of any aversive stimulation. With that being said, there are some data indicating that punishment can be preferred over extinction, but we'll discuss that next module. Extinction does, of course, have its limitations as well. First, like any intervention, it shouldn't be used in isolation. It doesn't teach an alternative behavior, so even if we eliminate the problem behavior, something else will likely arise to take its place, and it may or may not be appropriate. Second, extinction has a few concerning side effects, especially if it is used alone. If you're implementing extinction with an already dangerous behavior like aggression, property destruction, or SIB, the behavior may get worse before it decreases in rate. In those cases, you may need to cease the intervention. If you stop using extinction once you've started, the behavior will be even more difficult to change in the future. Similarly, if you don't use extinction consistently and with good treatment integrity, the behavior will actually become even more resistant to extinction. Why is that? If you're only preventing the consequence of the behavior sometimes, that means that the behavior is sometimes being reinforced, i.e., on an intermittent schedule. Behavior that is maintained on a very thin intermittent schedule will actually occur at a higher rate and be more resistant to change than a behavior that is maintained on a continuous schedule. If you don't think extinction will be implemented with good procedural fidelity, you shouldn't use it. Finally, it may be impossible, unreasonable, or unethical to remove the consequences of a response. For example, it's much more difficult to extinguish automatically reinforced behavior than socially reinforced behavior. Sometimes you have no way of reasonably preventing the consequence. If vocal behavior is maintained by the sound it makes, you can't just have the individual wear earplugs all day. That would be very restrictive and would interfere with their other activities throughout the day. As another example, if running into the middle of the street is maintained by attention, you can't just ignore it when it occurs. That would be insanely dangerous. Under the heading Establishing Operations in the assigned reading, cases in which it would be unethical to implement extinction are discussed. I strongly advise you to review these and keep them in mind in development of any treatment package. In this video, you'll see my dog Murphy barking a lot. This particular style of barking is maintained by attention, so I'm attempting to implement attention extinction. What went wrong here? What will likely happen in the future? The extinction burst was too aversive for poor Rob, and he couldn't resist reacting to Murphy. So we're going to see a lot more barking in the future, even if we try really hard to ignore it. The Preparatory Ed Puzzle reviewed the material from Lerman and Iwata's 1996 article, but I've included some of the most important points here as well. First, intervene on problem behavior as soon as possible when you see that it started to occur. The longer it continues to happen, the longer its history of reinforcement will be, and the harder it will be to alter. Second, as reviewed at the start of this lecture, always base the extinction procedures on the function of behavior. Whatever is maintaining the behavior no longer provide that reinforcement when the behavior occurs. Next, remember that a continuous or fixed ratio 1 schedule of reinforcement preceding extinction makes the behavior less resistant to extinction. This is very convenient if you precede extinction with a functional analysis, in which we use an FR1 schedule of reinforcement. However, interestingly, there's been some research showing that an intermittent schedule of reinforcement before extinction makes an extinction burst less likely. With that being said, combination of extinction with a proactive intervention like NCR also makes an extinction burst less likely, so that's probably a better way to go. Here are a few more points to keep in mind. Behavior is maintained by reinforcement, but made more or less likely in the moment based on specific MOs and SDs. Extinction will occur more quickly and with less likelihood of an extinction burst if you change the antecedents in the environment. Whatever the environment quote-unquote looks like when the behavior was being reinforced, if you change that in some way during intervention, there will be less stimulus control over the behavior. It's important to implement extinction across the board from the start. It's not a good idea to use extinction in only one environment. That can cause a phenomenon called behavioral contrast. If behavior is reduced in rate in one environment, it increases in other environments to compensate. In colloquial terms, think of it this way. The individual wants the given form of reinforcement just as much, but can no longer get it in one environment, so they'll want it even more elsewhere. This can also, however, be addressed by combining extinction with differential reinforcement. The individual can't get the reinforcement by engaging in the problem behavior, but if they can easily get it by engaging in an alternative behavior, behavioral contrast shouldn't occur. In addition, it's simply the ethical choice to, whenever possible, teach an alternative behavior that serves the same function as the behavior you're trying to eliminate. We'll talk about punishment in the next module, but note that combining punishment and extinction is also quite effective. Not only does the target behavior not produce reinforcement, but it also produces some form of aversive consequence. Of course, we want to reduce reliance on punishment whenever possible, so this would likely only be implemented if we found our treatment package to be ineffective, or if the behavior was so dangerous that it needed to be reduced rapidly. Now we're moving on a bit from discussion of extinction and isolation. If a behavior is maintained by escape from demands, how could we make that behavior less likely to occur in the future? There are many possibilities that we've discussed in class. You could manipulate the SDs that occasion the behavior. For example, if only a specific teacher's aide reinforced this behavior with escape in the past, a different aide could be assigned to work with the individual. You could eliminate or alter the EO that evokes the behavior. If the behavior is evoked by difficult demands, you could use prompts to make the demands easier. You could reinforce a more appropriate alternative behavior at a higher rate and/or with a higher magnitude reinforcement, moving the problem behavior further down in the response class hierarchy. As we discussed in this module, you could use escape extinction, ensuring that the behavior is no longer reinforced. Finally, as we'll discuss next module, you could punish the behavior. When developing a treatment package, always think of all of the ways you could alter the antecedents and consequences that are functionally related to the target behavior. Remember that function-based interventions are those based on identification and alteration of environmental variables that evoke, occasion, or maintain a behavior. Meanwhile, arbitrary or default interventions still involve the manipulation of antecedents and consequences, but not those that are functionally related to the target behavior. You could use arbitrary competing reinforcement, an NCR or a differential reinforcement intervention, enrich the environment with stimuli that are more likely to be engaged with than the problem behavior. You could arbitrarily reinforce an incompatible behavior, or you could punish the target behavior. These interventions can absolutely be effective. We simply prefer to use function-based interventions because they're more reliable and because it's more ethical to allow alternative access to whatever is maintaining the target behavior whenever possible. Can extinction ever be qualified as an arbitrary intervention? No. Extinction by definition involves the elimination of the specific form of reinforcement that was previously found to maintain the behavior, so it's always a function-based intervention. So, as noted in your behavior reduction plan rubric, a good treatment package will almost always include 3 basic components: proactive interventions, establishment of a replacement behavior, and reactive interventions. What will you do before the behavior occurs to ideally make it less likely? What behavior will you teach or reinforce to take the problem behavior's place? And what will you do if the problem behavior does still occur? Always be as precise and detailed as possible when naming components of a treatment package. Write your interventions technologically so that anyone could pick up your behavior intervention plan and implement it just as you would. When selecting interventions to be a part of a treatment package, always bear in mind the BACB task list objectives related to rationale for those interventions as well. Particularly with regards to extinction, you must ensure that it will actually be implemented with good treatment integrity, that it will be supported in the natural environment, that there will be sufficient staff present to keep the intervention in place and ensure the client's safety, that the intervention is judged to be socially valid such that parents, teachers, caregivers, etc. will willingly implement the intervention, etc. Your next fieldwork record, due by class time next week, asks that you describe how you could implement extinction of the behavior of a teenager sighing very loudly during dinner, maintained by escape from demands in the form of a parent telling them to go eat in their room. Be sure to only describe an extinction procedure with no other intervention components. See you next week.